Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes. We check into great theories, concepts, discoveries that could have a big impact on your life. Improve your mental, spiritual, and physical health. But these are things that have been suppressed, things that the powers that be don't want you to know about, things that you have to do a great deal of digging to access. And in some cases, you have to do some digging even once you've accessed them because they might be mentally or emotionally difficult. They might lay bare some of the fallacies that you've accepted in the past. Uh, this is another in our series of Bible decodes. I believe this is number 410. And we've chopped up the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is the idea that the Romans are the true authors of the New Testament. Yes, the New Testament was a psychological operation. Just like everything else, it was written by the Romans as a fictional story in order to mollify the Jews, to mellow out the Jews, to tame and domesticate the Jews, because they were a big pain for the Romans to govern ever since the Romans had occupied Judea in 63 BC. For over a century, they had been one constant revolt, revolution, uprising, um, waiting to happen. And this culminated in a war from 66 to 73 AD. And that war was fought on the by the Romans by General Vespasian and his son General Titus. They eventually become the new emperors called the Flavian emperors, starting in 69 AD. And they were both wounded in the 7-year-long war, and they both had a vested interest in making sure that the Jews did not revolt again. Now, in the original revolt, there were self-proclaimed Jews, self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs who rose up and kicked out the Roman puppet ruler. And so to counter that, the Flavian emperors came up with this psychological operation in order to create a story of a Jewish Messiah who was not a military commander, but instead was a prince of peace who was utterly deferential to the Romans. As you can see in your Gospels, not once, not ever, does Jesus do anything against the Romans. Everything that Jesus does when he gets aggressive or frisky, he does against the Jews. When he overturns the tables of the Jewish money changers, and he cusses out the Jewish merchants selling small animals at the temple, and he threatens his potential Jewish disciples that they have to abandon their families in order to follow him. While at the same time, he believes in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and walking the extra mile with the Roman soldiers' heavy pack and turning the other cheek to oppression, and comes within inches of justifying slavery, Roman slavery. So, and then as we proceed in the New Testament, we see that Paul is even more so than Jesus, even more deferential to the Romans, and even more critical of the Jews. This is a tailor-made psyop. It smells exactly like a psyop. And I know a lot of you out there have begun to, understand the scent of a psyop. You have seen a lot of them in the 20th and 21st century. Well, this one is from the 1st century, but it still smells the same, still looks the same. It's a psyop. It looks exactly like one, and it comes from a source of a fount of psyops. The Romans were masters of psychological warfare, and the Romans had created a number of other religions at this very time, including what you call rabbinical Judaism, which was kind of uh, the partner or twin of the Christianity. Uh, the mythology of the religion is exactly the same, and the development of it and the Flavians uh, basically ran a parallel operation against the Pharisaic Jews to develop rabbinical Judaism, the op against the zealous, uh, the kind of the more aggressive Jews became Christianity. Now, when the Romans wrote the New Testament, they inserted anything that they could find that would convince you that this was a religion. It's what you call a limited hangout. They had to put in religious stuff into their mythological story so that the reader would believe it. And so I believe they put in what you would call the kitchen sink. Uh, I think it was written as kind of by kind of a think tank of Roman intellectuals, maybe maybe uh, uh, centered on the Piso family, and the evidence is there if you read the work of Josephus, who was a so-called Roman historian living at Caesar's palace and writing under the name Flavius Josephus, meaning that he was a family member of the Flavians by adoption. According to his autobiography, he was originally a Jew and he fought in this war, but he defected to the Romans and became a tool of the Romans. And when he wrote his 7-volume War of the Jews, a history of that war, it was given the enthusiastic endorsement of the Flavians, the Caesars. But if you examine, now Christians generally believe that Josephus serves as corroborating evidence for the existence of Jesus because he mentions Christ or Christus in his book. But that's because, again, Christians don't really do their research. They just usually rely upon hearsay that, oh, well, this book gives corroborating evidence. Okay, that's good enough for me. Don't need to actually open up the book to see what it says. I'll just take your word for it. That's because they go on faith. But if you don't go on faith, but instead you go on evidence, then you would open up the book and see if it actually does corroborate the existence of Jesus. And you will find that it does quite the opposite. It is very powerful evidence against the existence of Jesus because you can see all the themes and many of the stories and are identical to the stories in the Gospels. In particular, you can see that the military campaign of Titus in War of the Jews serves as a model for the ministry of Jesus in the New Testament. There are, I believe, 46 separate events, 46 places that Titus goes in his military campaign in Judea that Jesus also goes to in the same order. And at each location, they encounter parallel events where the event is generally um, experienced by Titus literally, while it is experienced by Jesus symbolically. A quick example of that is I believe it's the first event, but on the Sea of Galilee. And on the Sea of Galilee, Jesus first meets the two fishermen, Simon and Andrew, um, his first two disciples, and he tells them that, um, you know, I will make you fishers of men. So Jesus is telling his disciples, his followers, that he's going to make them fishers of men. Uh, Titus, in his military campaign, is fighting a battle against the Jews on the water at the Sea of Galilee. One of the Jewish ships capsizes or something to that effect, and a bunch of the Jews end up in the water. And Titus, who is commanding the ship for the Romans, tells his men to get out their spears and their nets and to, when the Jews put their heads above the water, to, spear them and bring them in. So Titus is telling his men to become literal fishers of men. And that is the Roman humor. The Romans love to mock and ridicule, and they love to mock and ridicule the Jews. And all of their jokes are at the expenses of the Jews in this whole satire. But that's kind of the character and the tenor of how the Romans do their psychological operations, with this kind of grim humor that is documented by Joseph Atwill in his book Caesar's Messiah, and also in Michael Menescott's book called Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. Atwill also has a book called Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. There are several other authors that have also covered this Roman origins hypothesis, but I think those two are the place to start. Now, what we're doing today is we're looking at some of the work from Kersey Graves, his 1876 book that is called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity. And in this book, he goes over some of this evidence that I'm talking about, how the Romans put in all of these influences into their limited hangout. Stuff from Egypt, stuff from Greece, from Rome, from Persia, from India, from China, from Japan. They put in stuff from the mystery schools, from shamanism, from astrology, from numerology, from magic. Um, all of the stuff is incorporated into the New Testament. It's very diverse, but none of it is original. All of it is derivative of much older sources. The Romans just put in everything but the kitchen sink into the New Testament. And Graves, in this chapter, he compares the 346 points of similarity between Christianity and Krishna, the Indian deity slash Messiah slash Savior, whose story dates from 1200 BC. So over 1,000 years older than Jesus, but the same basic story in 346 separate points. concepts. And right now, I think he's talking about the Jews in Alexandria, Egypt, which was really the second city of the Roman Empire, and where a great amount of syncretism occurred. Blending of religions, the forging of new religions, and how many Jews were kind of uh, waylaid in Alexandria. There was a lot of Jewish activity, especially in the more Hellenized Jews, the more Greek-speaking Jews in the empire, kind of ended up in Alexandria, and that he feels like that's where the Jews picked up all of these influences that from Krishna that that got incorporated into Christ. Okay, so this is point number 10 here of all of the points that he's talking about with Alexandria. Hence, every consideration would lead us to conclude, taken in connection with the facts above stated, and the well-known borrowing proclivity and imitative propensity of the Jews, that they would not and could not withstand the overweening and overpowering temptation to make another radical change in their religion by a new draft on the boundless reservoir of speculative ideas, religious tenets, and specious theories then glowing in the popular schools of Alexandria. Number 11, all the facts above enumerated would impel us to the conclusion that the Jews would, and every page of history touching the matter proves they did, make important changes in their religion by this contact with the Oriental systems as they had repeatedly done before. Some of this proof we will here present to show how they originated Christianity. Number 12, the schools of Alexandria, says Mr. Enfield, a Christian writer, by pretending to teach sublime doctrines concerning God and divine things, enticed men of different countries and religions, and among the rest, the Jews, to study its mysteries and incorporate them with their own. The Jewish faith mixed with the Pythagorean and afterward with the Egyptian Oriental theology. That is, they became Essenes in the Grecian school of Pythagoras, who taught the doctrines of that religious order, then Buddhists in the Egyptian school of Alexandria. And finally, with Christ as their leader, who taught the doctrines of both schools, they assumed the name of Christian in honor of him, and thus is Christianity from Essene Buddhism. Number 13, Beers, in his History of the Jews, sustains the above statement by the declaration that the Essenian Jews fled to Egypt at the time of the Babylonian captivity, and there became acquainted with the Pythagorean philosophy and engrafted it upon the religion of Moses, which would make them Essenian Buddhists. For Cunningham assures us that the doctrines of Pythagoras were intensely Buddhistic. Now, I just have to point out again that all of this commentary about the Essenes is entirely speculative, and that the only people who ever had any type of eyewitness contact with the so-called Essenes were Philo Judaeus, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger. These are all people who are very close to the Roman Caesars. We talked about Josephus. Pliny was Josephus's younger foster brother and a very close insider to the Roman court. And Philo Judaeus was from Alexandria, but he was one of the richest families in the Roman Empire, and he was a little bit earlier period, but his family was in contact with both the Herods and the Flavians. So the fact that they mentioned his existence and nobody else makes you think that it's very similar to Jesus, that he never existed, that the Essenes never existed, but that they were created as a psychological operation by the Romans. So that, I think, has to be kept in mind, even though, he did have a section earlier where he was talking about the Essenes, but never presents any evidence that they existed. He's presents a lot of secondary evidence, secondary sources that talk about the Essenes and speculate about them, but it's all based on the writings of Philo, uh, Josephus, and Pliny the Younger. Okay, number 14, we will condense a few more historical testimonies uh, relative to the entire change of the Jewish faith while in Alexandria, as well as on other occasions, to show how easy and natural it was for that portion of the Jews who afterward became the founders of Christianity to slide into and adopt Essenian Buddhism, whose doctrines they took to constitute the Christian religion. Uh, Section 15, Mr. Gibbon declares that the theological opinions of the Jews underwent great changes by their contact with the various foreigners they found in Alexandria. Mr. Tytler, likewise, in his Universal History, assures us that the Jewish religion became totally changed by the intermixture of heathen doctrines. Dr. Campbell also testifies that their views came pretty much to coincide with those of the pagans, and the author of the Expositor for 1854 complains that the pagan theology stole upon them from every quarter and mingled in all views the then known tribes, so that by the year 150 BC it had wrought visible changes in their notions and habits of thought. Here we have the proof that the whole Jewish religion underwent a change in Alexandria. I would certainly argue that the Jewish religion was already pagan way before that, but um, that is a different discussion that we could have. Um, it's really, Yahweh Elohim is just a peer of all of the pagan Ashtoreth and Moloch and Baal and Shamash. They're all, competitors. They're not, one is not a god and the other are demons. They're all exactly have the same standing. They're all Elohim, um, which doesn't mean God, although it was translated as God. It means those who came from above. Okay, number 16. Now, most certainly a nation or sect professing a religion so easily changed and possessing a character so fickle or so impressible as to yield on every slight occasion and embrace every opportunity to imbibe new religious ideas and doctrines would easily, if not naturally, slide into the adoption of the religious system then promulgated in Alexandria under the name of Buddhism, and afterward remodeled or transformed and called Christianity. The Jews, number 17, the Jews of the Essenian order, as we have in part shown in a previous chapter, set forth in their creed all the leading doctrines now comprised in the Christian religion hundreds of years before the advent of Christ, not accepting the doctrine of the divine incarnation and its adjuncts as these concomitants of the present popular faith, we will now prove were not unknown to the Jewish theology, but constituted a part of the religion of some of the principal Jewish sects. That standard Christian author, Mr. Milman, in his History of Christianity, tells us that The doctrine of the incarnation was the doctrine from the Ganges and even the shores of the Yellow Sea um, of the Ilyssus. Not sure what that is. ILISSUS. It was the fundamental principle of the Indian Buddhist religion and philosophy. It was the basis of Zoroastrianism. It was pure Platonism. It was Platonic Judaism in the Alexandrian school. Here it is positively declared by a popular Christian writer whose work is part of nearly every popular library in Christendom as a standard authority that the appearance of God amongst men in the human form by human birth was a doctrine of the Jewish religion in some of its branches, especially the Essenian branch. Further proof that Christianity originated nothing and gave utterance to no new doctrine or precepts and performed no new miracles. Where then is the claim for its originality? On what ground is it predicated? Please answer us, good Christian brother. Number 18. It is a question of no importance if it could be settled whether Christianity is a direct outgrowth from one of the newfangled sects of Judaism or whether it derived a portion of its doctrines from this source and the balance from ascetic Buddhism. Yet we regard it as an incontrovertible proposition that it all grew out of Buddhism originally, either directly or indirectly. Christ may have received his doctrine second-handed, all or a portion from the Essenian Jews, for that sect held all the leading doctrines of Buddhism, as we have shown in a previous chapter, which I have shown that is speculative, which now goes under the name of the religion of Jesus Christ. Now, another point that I'd like to make about the Essenes is some people think that the Essenes and the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls were synonymous, but their doctrines are quite different. The Essenes were very pacifistic. They were very much against war and against, violence, while the Dead Sea Scrolls writers were not. They were quite enthusiastic about holy war. So I think that those differences kind of indicate, that the Dead Sea Scrolls people actually did exist, while the Essenes actually did not exist. Maybe the Dead Sea Scrolls people didn't exist either, but the Essenes definitely, I feel like they definitely didn't exist because, you can't trust these Roman authors. They had full control uh, of all in the Roman Empire, all publishing, distribution, and censorship. Everything that the Romans were writing was a psychological operation. There was no such thing as history or science or philosophy. It was all propaganda. You know, even their most sacred cows would not hesitate to fabricate something in favor of propagandistic purposes. Okay, number 20. Or we may indulge the not unreasonable hypothesis that the founders of Christianity, who republished the doctrines of Buddhism and adopted them as their own, received them all direct from the disciples of that religious order. For they were everywhere, as one writer declares, speaking of their extensive travel to propagate their doctrines through the world. And it was about that period, as Mr. Goodrich informs us, they sent out 900 missionaries who made 6 millions of converts, a small fraction of their present number, 1/3 more than the entire census of Christendom. and 6 times the number of believers in the Christian religion if we omit Greeks and Catholics. It is, as a writer remarks, the oldest and most widely spread religion in the world. And whatever hypothesis may be adduced to account for the fact, Christianity is now all Buddhism. I'd say that's a big stretch. Um, I think we're going to stop right there. I really wish he would draw this chapter to an end because I think it's kind of lowering his credibility. Um, uh, he's not barking up the right tree here, I don't think. I mean, I think that there's a definite link between Christ and Krishna, but he's not making the link with the Romans, and instead he's making a link with the Essenes and Alexandria, um, because he is believing in the existence of the Essenes. But regardless, we will return to this um, never ending chapter here um, when we return tomorrow. And thanks for tuning in today. Like, share, and subscribe, and comment and contribute. And come back tomorrow for another Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.